Today's training, we're going to be talking about pitch deck design 101, which is how to create pitch decks that wow investors and tell your story in a simple, clear, and effective way.
$80.
Now, another thing too, if you guys see like my kids walk in, you're going to know everybody's working from home. So I'll be that guy in that C-SPAN one where the kid like goes back and then you have to slam the door. I'll just put them on my lap and they'll hang out. But the whole presentation, we're going to divide it into three separate sections. Simplicity, which is how do you make your pitch decks simple? Not say all the things on all the slides. How do you make it simple, clear, easy? And then number two, consistency. There's a subtle difference between a professional deck and a non-professional deck. And what makes something look professional? We already know what it looks like. Sometimes we can't put our finger on what exactly it is. But I'm going to show you some ways to create consistent designs using patterns to help create that professional look that you're going for. And then priority, and this is especially true when you're doing send-along decks, when you're not in the room. How do you use design to get them to read the things that you want them to read in the order in which you want them to read it? So, and that goes into the story and how you tell the story in the proper order. You have the order of the slides, but then even on the slides, there's a specific order. So let's talk about, before we jump into the training, let's talk about the reality of pitching investors today. I'm sure I have some investors on the call with us today. And so they'll relate to some of these numbers. 3,000, so the average partner at a firm or an angel investor may see up to 3,000 pitches a year. This may come from cold email, may come from market, from networking, and any of these things, from warm intros, that sort of thing. They see a lot of pitches. And any VC that you talk to or any angel knows what I'm talking about. And then of those 3,500 of them, they'll actually closely view. They'll actually look at the deck. They'll have a Zoom call, all these things. And then of those 500, they may not invest in any of them. And if they do, maybe it's one or two. So your goal is to get the whole way down here. How do you go from all of these pitches up here, the whole way down to the bottom and hopefully get that check? Now, if you happen to be lucky enough to make it to that 500, they're going to spend an average of 3 minutes and 44 seconds looking at that deck. It may even be less. It may be 60 seconds. And so what I'm going to help you avoid are some common mistakes because you can't afford to make any mistakes in this amount of time, even less amount of time. So let's walk through some of those common mistakes that I see. And I see a lot of these decks. I've made a lot of these mistakes. Number one is unclear narrative. And if there's any investors on this call, they know that's the number one thing. They have no idea. They look at the end they get to the end of the deck, they're like, well, I don't even still have no idea what this product does or what problem it solves. So the story is the star of the show, not the design. Nothing else is the star of the show, but the story and the product and the problem that it solves. Number two, too many slides. You see I get some slide decks, they're like 40 slides. And it just takes too long to go through it. And the ideas are so spread out, or they're so dense and there's so much information they can't even get through it. Or they may have 10, 15 slides or whatever, but then of those 10 to 15 slides, there's so much data just jammed in there. And so they may follow all these. They may have a clear story. They may have just the right amount of slides. They may not even have that much info on each slide's great, but then they have this poor layout and font choices. And notice how that's like further down the thing. These are the most important. Poor layout is just something you should just have. I mean, a good layout is just something you should just have. And I'll show you how to do some layouts and how to choose the right font faces or typefaces and stuff like that. And that's pretty easy. Once you learn some of these principles, this should be the easiest one to fix. Some of these are a little bit harder. You have to know a lot about what you're talking about with the story. And then complex diagrams. Now, if there's any PhDs, I apologize. But for some reason, anytime I talk to a PhD, there's always like these really complex diagrams and like arrows moving around and like all this stuff all over the page. And it ends up, the problem is you're pitching to people who aren't PhDs. So they're confused. And now just because you've told them everything, now they're confused and now you've lost them. And the whole reason why we want to do this is so we avoid the trash can, or if it's a fancy one, they've been superhuman, right? It's archive or hide or snooze or whatever that is. We want to avoid this and make it the whole way down. Now, when I talk about design, there's two ways to look at design. If you ever want to offend a designer, just say, hey, just make it pretty. Just make it pretty, right? And the designer thinks, well, my job is not just, and I can think like a developer and I can put on my sales hat and I can easily say that, yeah, just take this and make it pretty. But a designer's job and using principles is about making it look good and making it effective, make it not get in the way of communicating the message, but actually enhance it. So you can look at things where it's like pretty, but not effective, right? So you can have this beautiful little watering can. It's like got beautiful blue injection molding and all this stuff. It's definitely not effective. It doesn't work at all. It's pretty, it doesn't work. Then you have over here the umbrella hat. And the reason why I picked this picture is because my dad actually had an umbrella hat. And I actually wore this one time. And it was awesome. And think about it, that was even before cell phones. Like now you can be walking. I lived in New York for 10 years. Like imagine rocking the work. I could just be on my phone and not have to worry about the umbrella and do the one-handed cell phone where you drop it out of your hand. It's very effective, but you look like an idiot when you're walking down the street, unless you're a dad like me and you're just like, I don't care. You just got that dad ambivalence and you just don't care anymore. You're just giving up, trying to look cool. So to do something that's pretty and effective, you don't have to be an amazing designer. You don't have to go to design school. You don't have to study design, all these things. You just have to learn a couple of these principles to make things look good and also use it to be effective. Now, why should you listen to me? What do I know about any of this? Well, I've been in the trenches. I've been in the rooms with the VCs and the angels and pitching and making mistakes and spilling orange juice all over the table and coffee and like being nervous and my partner kicking me under the table because I was blabbing on about something or I said something or I revealed a piece of data I probably shouldn't have, whatever it is. I've gotten the emails that say like, how can we be helpful? And it's not a good fit. And I've also got the emails that say we're in. So I've been in that roller coaster of emotion that is raising money. So I can use a lot of that experience to show you things. Hey, don't do this because I did this. Please don't avoid this because I did this and this happened. So I'm speaking from experience. Now, not only have I used decks to do investment, pitching investors and things like that, but also acquisition presentations. We did, when we had my first startup, we did an acquisition presentation for Facebook. I mean, you get one shot. It's like Eminem. You're in there with the whole product team, and Adam Ossiri, who ran Instagram, is in there, and like you're just super nervous, but you got to make sure that presentation is tight, that story is tight, because they're not inviting you back the second time. We did the same thing with Twitter, and then we did one for Moo. We actually ended up selling to Moo. So how do you create presentations that are for actual acquisition? How do you pitch the team vision and how the two teams can combine? Also did it at Squarespace. Now, what happened was I started doing these decks, and one of our initial investors, our early investors, I love them to death, Box Group, Dave Tisch and Adam Nemi over there, amazing. And I did a deck for Dave for Box Group along with their brand to do their initial or their second or third, I don't even know which round it was, of LPs, raising their big fund that they go out and invest in startups. So I did theirs, and I don't know how much they ended up raising, maybe 50 of that. And then Dave started sending me startups in their portfolio like, hey, Jack, so-and-so, actually, no, he wouldn't even email me. I would get an email from the founder, be like, Dave told me my deck sucks and you need to redesign. I'd be like, all right, fine. I'll do it for Dave or whatever. And so what's cool is those companies that we did those decks for ended up to raise probably at this point over $100 million, which is pretty cool to be a part of. And hopefully that deck was, a part of getting that money. Obviously everything else is just as important. But also using pitch decks to do partnership things. When I was at Vimeo, design director at Vimeo, we did a lot of presentations with Apple, and we were integrating with Final Cut Pro and all these things. And Apple, you better bring your presentation game, because Apple obviously is the best at that. And then Pentagram was a design firm I worked at right out of college, and you're pitching clients. So we're a design firm, we're sitting in front of the whole marketing department at the Jets, or we're pitching Bloomberg, or we're pitching Time Warner or Saks Fifth Avenue, any of these things. You had to get, and they're definitely looking at the presentation because they're hiring you as a designer. So it better be good. Now, as a teacher, some of the background, I've been a teacher on Skillshare since 2008, or no, it'd be 8 years on Skillshare. And then an adjunct professor at FIT, teaching design. On Skillshare, I have 33,000 students across 5 different classes. And those students have listened to 1.3 million minutes of me blab on. And my wife's like, that sounds terrible for someone to listen to you for 1.3 minutes, but whatever. So let's dive into the training. Now, if you have any questions, like I said in the beginning, we can put them in the chat. We can get to them towards the end. Now, point 1, simplicity. How do you create a simple, clean, legible pitch deck? And this is what happens to all the things that like I said before, they want to say all the things on all the slides, and they say, but Jack, I say, well, why don't you just get rid of this? And they're like, but I have to say that. I have to tell them that, because if I don't say that, then they're not going to know, and then they're not going to invest, and they get everybody. So instead of just like, they're scared of not saying it, so then they say everything so that they could never say that they didn't say that, right? So then it creates decks that look like this, giant amounts of big blocks of text, background images, all of these things. Now, I will say there's a caveat to this. In a send-along deck, you can have a little bit more text, certainly not entire slides filled. You're not giving them a book. You're giving them the main point. So it's still not an excuse, even if it's a send-along deck, for a ton of content. So I'm going to walk through 6 ways to simplify your deck. So here's the practical stuff, right? We talked about the intro. We talked about investors, all the stuff. Here's the nitty-gritty stuff. Here's the things that you can do today. You can fire a Keynote or Figma or PowerPoint or whatever. Number 1 is the easiest one. Easier said than done, I would say. Reduce the amount of slides. So I went through and looked back at all the decks that I've done, and I'm like, okay, most of the C decks I've done have been between 10 and 15 slides. Now, when you get into the series A, B, C, on and up, you have much more data to talk about. Like, you have real results. Now, you may have some results over here in C, but not nearly as much as if you had with series A, because now you're talking about employees, you have P&Ls, you have all of these things, probably a bigger team. It's still not an excuse to 40 slides. Like I've gotten some decks in like series B or whatever, C, that have like 50 slides, and it's still not an excuse, because you're still trying to pitch the investors. Like you still need to be able to keep it, tight and concise. Now, what I've done is I've gone out there and I'm like, okay, what are the standard types of slides that our investors are expecting? I always say pattern interrupts work in marketing, but when you're in a presentation, the more you interrupt the pattern and the mental models that most investors have, don't get fancy on the types of slides. Get fancy and clever and break the pattern with your product in the story. Because the more you veer off from this kind of stuff, the more they're trying to get oriented and trying to figure out, okay, well, I haven't seen that type of slide before. Like I really just want to learn about like the customers, but they're giving me some other kind of crazy pitch or whatever. So I often encourage founders just to stick to these type of patterns. Now, this is just a standard 15 one. I'm not going to go through. I'll send the presentation PDF over at the end. 15 slides that we have. Now, you could go with a 500 startups approach, especially for C decks, right? So they even nailed it down further to 10 slides. These are all pretty common slides that you'll see. Or you could go with the Y Combinator model, which is even less. Big one-liner, problem, solution, traction, market, competition, vision, team, and use of funds. There you go. Now you can use these patterns to go back to your slide deck and be like, man, I have a lot. I have 35. How do I get it? Now you can start to use these kind of formulas to simplify it and reduce the amount of slides. The second principle is one idea per slide. There's a thing called Hick's law that the more choices that you have on a slide, the more time it takes for that viewer to understand what's happening on that slide. What's happening when they're kind of figuring out all the things you have on the slide, 15 different ideas. What they're not doing is listening to you talk. And when they're not listening to you talk, you've lost them, you've lost the story. They're tuned out and they may have missed something that you said that's really important, but because they're trying to figure out all these things. So you can even look at this slide. There's really only 2 pieces of text, an arrow, and some X and Y axis. That's it. It's not like there's 15 different things on the slide, because I want you to listen to what I'm saying as I'm saying it. Now, there's a reason why in PowerPoint default slides and Keynote slides, there's this approach, which is big headline with 3 bullets. So this is the promise that you're making. This is the claim that you're making. And then you're backing it up with 3 bullet points. This is the one idea, and this is the proof of that one idea. So you make the claim and you prove it over here. Now you can also have a slide that's like this, where you're making the claim, backing it up with data. Make the claim, back it up with data. One idea on that slide. Now, if you have an idea that's a little bit more complex than this, right? If you need a little bit more than just some bullets here, that you can use what's called the rule of 3. And this is something you'll see in a lot of presentations that Apple gives, and all, Airbnb or any of the other big ones. You'll see the rule of 3, because 3 is the minimum amount of numbers you get to create a pattern. Otherwise, it's binary, right? Because now with 3, now you can start creating interesting patterns, and it's a nice compact way to present an idea that's not overwhelming. 4 starts to get a little bit too much. 5 and 6 and 7 or 8 start to get too much. If you look, this is what Apple does in their presentations. They're bringing out rule of 3. They're not putting, 15 different things on this screen. One idea, which is which iPhone is right for you, rule of 3 with all the phones. Now, with this one, you can see one idea of how to stay in touch: schedule a call, join the pitch community, or check out the help center. These are 3 different ways to talk about this idea of staying in touch. If you're talking about your target audience, you could break it into a rule of 3. If you had 7 different target audiences here, then it's a little bit harder for them to grasp it quickly. So they are listening to you and not spending a whole bunch of time trying to understand what's going on. Number 4 is make it obvious. If you look at this map, this is not an electoral college map. Don't worry. It is just a map. There is blue and there's gray. That's all. There's not much that you can infer from just this map. You can see, yeah, okay, some of the states are gray, some of the states are blue. What does that tell me? Now you can get a little bit more obvious. It's like, oh, okay, so the blue or the purple ones are the active customers, revenues 100 million, potential customers. Okay, that makes sense. I can start to put that together. Again, I'm going through cycles in my brain cycles where I'm not paying attention to you. And I could calculate the percentage, but why not just say 80% of the states in the US are active customers? That's what you wanted to say, right? So like my wife does this all the time. She asks questions that are actually statements like, did you forget to take out the garbage last night? I'm like, well, why don't you just say, take the garbage? Like, why do you have that? Why can't you just make it obvious, right? So here, you're not being obvious about what you want to get across. You want to get across the 80% of the states. That's an impressive number, but they wouldn't have been able to do that without doing some sort of math, counting up all the states and then doing the math. You're doing the math for them. Again, doing the thinking for them so that they can get back to listening to you. Number 5, show, don't tell. If you look at the word horse, when you read that word in your brain, you're not thinking of the letters HORSE. What you're actually doing is picturing a horse, because humans think in pictures. We don't think in individual letters. So when I say the word horse, you could picture a horse in your head. You're not actually thinking of the individual letters. Now, if you take something like this, using the rule of 3, I have 3 bullet points. It's nothing bad about this. If I'm talking about some sort of software, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. But how can you use things to use illustrations or use images to help them understand it just by using some images? So in here, if you go to Undra, I think it's undra.co, there's a ton of free illustrations that you can use here. that use images to think in pictures. When we think about posting files on mobile, to actually see someone like just posting it physically creates a better visual model in your head. Even the check mark, get fast credit approval, it enhances it. It doesn't overwhelm it. It doesn't distract. It works in tandem with it to show and not just tell them. If you look at this, the typical number slide here, we're like, okay, this is the total addressable market. And this is the 90 million. This is the 20 million number. Now, there's a big difference between 2.5 billion and 90 million. There's a pretty significant difference between 90 and 20. If you look at the circles now, granted, this circle should probably even be much larger. Like if I actually did the real ratio math, I could really show the difference if this circle were huge. But again, you can see just by using some sort of basic imagery, and we've all seen these slides, but there's a real reason why they are the way that they are, because they're showing and not just telling. There's a difference between using design here to actually exaggerate and illustrate the differences so that it gets across. If you're trying to talk about like, there's a huge opportunity right here, then show that. Use design to really exaggerate that so it pops out and they get it right away. Number 6, economy of words. This was a slide. I took out all the names on this slide. This was a slide I was working on the other day. And this has a lot of words on it. Now, this would be fine for a send-along deck, but if I were presenting it, imagine if I was like, Digital Identity Company is a premier consulting firm specializing in, I would just blab on. And literally, I've been in presentations where I've watched people do this. The worst offenders are substitute teachers. Bless the substitute teacher. My dad was a teacher. Sometimes they'll do this. Just literally read the words on the screen. Now, Guy Kawasaki talked about this, and because he worked at Apple, marketer or whatever, and he was like, what happens is when you do this, I'm a fast reader. My wife's a slower reader. It doesn't matter. You're going to be either faster or slower than the presenter. So when they're at a sync, they may be done with this and they're not even listening to you. So you've maybe read this whole thing or read whatever, and they're going on and talking about more things, and they're going, oh, wait, hold on. And they're getting nervous because like they're trying to read it before you move on. Like we've all had experiences like that. So that's what happens when you don't have an economy of words on there. You're not very intentional about the words that you put on. If you look at any YC deck, they are very brutal with the economy of words. Cut time to sale in half. They didn't need to say a whole bunch of giant paragraphs on, all the different conversion metrics and stuff like that. Melodics, 1 billion, 90% quit. That, we don't have any context there, but that's what's great about these types of slides is as a presenter, you can use these to enhance your message and keep you on track. Even things like this, 12 times faster duration, 250K saved. You don't even need to write it in some giant sentence. It can just be these words on the screen, like 500,000, small, that's it. Just one word on the screen tells a lot. Now, the thing about, well, let's step back here for a second. So we economy of words. Now we're going to move on to consistency. So we went through simplicity. Now we're on consistency. Now, the thing about consistency is in design is we all know, like I said earlier, we all know what looks good. We all know what, like, hey, that looks good, but that doesn't look good. And we don't know why. If you're not a designer, you don't know why, but you know something good when it looks good. And there's a secret sauce behind the scenes that's happening with good designers that are using this to make things look professional that you may not see just to the naked eye. And once you see this now, it's like seeing the Matrix. You'll never be able to unsee it. So the key to consistency in design is patterns, right? So how can I use visual design patterns to create consistency across all my slides? So if you look here, the next little emoji on here is the angry face person, right? So they will go over here. That's that visual pattern. We are pattern. Humans love to find patterns. Immediately, we want to look for patterns. Now, here are 4 ways to create this pattern consistency that's going to get you that professional looking deck. Number 1, using layout patterns. Again, I'll go back to, it's better to be clear, not clever. You don't have to get super clever with your layouts. There's a reason why good decks stick to common common layouts because it's a pattern that people understand. They don't have to get oriented to how you have things set up. You know, things like big header, subheader, big header, image, big header, 2 things, 3 things, header over here, big image over here, 3 things, whatever. These are all common patterns that you can use right out of the box. I rarely ever go outside of these. Most of what I do ends up being in one of these layouts. So it just helps you move faster. So you don't have to like, reinvent the wheel every time you're creating a new slide. Just pick the one that works best for the content that you have and move on. Number 2 is color patterns. Now, if you look at consistency using color, if you look at title slides, they're all blue. So if you even look at my Figma document here, this big, long, big, giant canvas, you can see all of the main slides here are black and white. All of the sections within those main sections are purple and white. And then if it's a content thing, usually it has a white background. There's a reason why I did that, because then you know, like, oh, Jack's on the title slide, Jack's on a section slide, Jack's on a content slide. So you can just, it's a very subtle thing, but it helps the viewer understand where they are in this presentation and what they're looking at. So look at it and say, okay, what are all my title slides? What color do I want them to be? What are all my section slides? What color I want? And just be consistent. And it doesn't take much time just to go through and just kind of analyze it from a bird's eye view to create that color consistency. Same way with font colors. If you look here, I use the same color font for these headlines. I'm going to use a gray for all the subheadlines. I'm going to use green numbers for all the positive metrics. I may use red numbers for all the negative metrics. And again, it just seems like obvious, but a lot of people, especially I'll see like different shades of green. Like that's just like an easy change. Just make sure you're using the same colors. And then they'll know when they'll see the subheadline, they'll know, oh, that's a subheadline. That's gray. I've seen that before. Boom, it fits into the rest of the consistency as far as the design. If you have captions down here that you would use color as a gray color with the dark color on top of it, whatever it is, but it's consistent across your whole presentation. Now you can do the same thing with color. You can also do the same thing with font size patterns. And this is where this is key to making these slides look really good. This is the first thing I do is I use what's called a modular type scale. So if you want to sound really cool to your designer friends, be like, oh yeah, I created a modular type scale. And all a modular type scale is just some rhyme or reason and a mathematical way to calculate different sizes on your screen. That way you don't have to guess every slide, or this one's going to be 42 pixels and this one's going to be 10 pixels. And I don't know if you're not a designer, but you may feel like you're just guessing on a lot of this stuff. This is going to make it much easier. So if you go to type-scale.com, you can type in your base font size, which I never go below 32 on a slide deck because it's just too small. And my eyes are going, I'm getting older, and it's like squinting on the thing. I can't see it. So usually 32 is the lowest I'll go. You type in 32 and then you type in, you select, well, I always use the golden ratio scale. It's basically like Pythagorean thing, whatever it is, a perfect rectangle. There's all kinds of like funny memes that you can see. Like like Roman architecture uses this scale or whatever. Either way, it's just a pleasing ratio to use for humans. And basically it gives you that. And so I'll type in 32 and I don't ever use like 51.78. I'll do like a round up, right? 52, 84, 136, 220, 355, whatever that is. Those are my scales. And now I can use those on my presentation. Now, the next thing to do is once you get that and say, okay, for every stat, I'm going to use 220. For every headline level 1, I'm going to use 136. For subline headlines, I'm going to use 84. Headline level 2, I'm going to use 52. Body copy 32, right? That way, then you make the decision once. You don't have to make a decision again. And everything looks clear, consistent, clean, and it gives you that professional look. Now, so that's font size. Next is grid patterns. And grids are also the Swiss Army knife for designers. Using grids helps create order out of chaos. And the chaos is all the stuff you want to put on the slide. You can use grids to organize that in a logical manner. Now, I always use a six column grid because it gives me the most amount of evenly divisible columns. So I can do something that's one part of the grid. I can do 2 columns here. I can do 3, I can do 4, I can do 6. And that way I can create infinite amount of possibilities just with that. So if you're in Keynote or you're in PowerPoint that you could create guides, just use your roller and just create these guides, divide the screen up. Now, usually I'll give a little bit of space inside here, unless you're doing like full bleed images or whatever. But typically I'll just give a little space in here, and then I'll just divide the screen up in 6 and then divide it up into 4 or whatever, however you want to do it. But either way, if you have a grid, then it's easier to make those decisions. If you look at this slide, image, headline, body copy. I just used a 2-column grid. It's going to look good every time because it's already using that spacing. You don't have to guess. Boom, it's done. You can move on. Same way with 3 things. You use that 3-column grid. There it is. You center the text within those columns. Done. Looks organized. It looks aligned. It looks clean. A team slide. You just go in, you use the 6-column in this case, right? So now you can take all of that, put their little names, put their headshots in there. Boom, you got a really clean looking team slide. Now imagine if like you weren't using a grid and Skylar was, you know, the space here was wider than Andy. Now it's like, well, why does Skylar have more space than Andy? Is there like some, you know, whatever, internal corporate politics? Is she more important than Andy? No, they're all equally important. That's why you use and by the way, none of these people exist, which is really freaky. I use one of those AI face generators, which is really, really dystopian, but just a little side note there. The last thing I'll say about consistency is check your vertical alignment. I don't know if you've ever seen slide decks where the header just like bounces up like 2 pixels. It drives people crazy, especially the really detailed personalities. And I am one of those, so I'm talking to some of you out there. It's like, why does that headline just keep bouncing every time they go in between slides? That creates that unprofessional look. So just pick a top, you know, whatever it is, the y-axis. If it's 10 pixels from the top, make sure it's 10 pixels from the top on every single slide for your headers. That's just a small detail that helps go a long way. The last piece for this is priority. How do you get them to look and read things and digest them in the way that you want them to do that? It's the same way with an orchestra. An orchestra, you are the conductor. You have the story, you have the message, and you're using design to orchestrate this flow, to orchestrate this story. So by the end, you have the crescendo, which is them going, I'm in, writing the check, you're done, right? Or saying, let's have a secondary meeting or follow-up meeting, whatever that is. You are the conductor. So you are in charge of how this flow goes. Just like if you've ever mixed any type of music, you're bringing the cymbals up, you're bringing the drums up, you're using design to bring things forward, bring things back on the page so that it doesn't all come at them at the same time. Imagine if this engineer just like pushed all the volume, thinking, oh, the music comes back and hits you at the same time. There's a reason why the best producers use those things to create that. Now, how do you do that? You use a term called visual hierarchy. Again, if you want to sound cool to your designer friends, just say, I love that visual hierarchy. It's on point. I love it. So I'm going to teach you 3 ways to create visual hierarchy. And all visual hierarchy is, it's just, what is the hierarchy of the data? If you were to type out, and this is what I always encourage people to do, don't get into PowerPoint, don't get into Keynote, just write out an outline, fire up Google Docs or Notion or whatever, Evernote, and just create an outline. And the outline itself is what will create the order of importance. It will just naturally come out, and you'll say headline, indent, bullet points, bullet, headline, indent, bullet, and then you'll get your entire outline. I mean, I did this for this class. I won't show it here, but it's just basically a whole outline of everything. Of the whole course, it comes down to an outline. Now, there's ways to do this on each slide, little hacks, little design hacks that you can use. If you look at this, I'm using a brighter color on a dark background, and it feels like this is coming forward and this is fading back. So I'm almost creating a Z index, a Z axis, something that's coming towards me and away from me. And that way, then I can have certain data come towards me and some data fall to the back because I want them to read this before I want them to read that. So you can use bright colors on a dark background to make it pop forward, or you can use dark colors on a light background to make it pop forward. So how does this look in practice? If you look at this team culture slide, we have a nice big image. We're using the grid here. We've got team culture here, which is dark, which is going to pop forward. And then we use this, which is gray, and it's going to sit back, right? If this were like bright purple, this is going to stand up. It doesn't matter that it's smaller than this. The colors is what's going to pop forward if it's using that brighter color on that white background. Same for the inverse. You notice how the same thing, now I just flip the colors and now I have a much brighter color on team culture on a dark background. Team culture pops to the front. So just a little tweaks like that, you can get them to read team culture first or whatever the headline is, because if they go to read this and they don't have this, then they may not have the context. Again, you're the conductor conducting what you want them to read first. Same thing with this. If you want these words to pop out, believe customers just a brand, whatever that is, you're using these darker colors to make it pop forward, just like the inverse. Believe customers just a brand. That's a brighter color, dark background. Boom, it comes out just using nothing but color. Next is contrast. To contrast in color. How do you use color contrast to make things jump out first? If you look at this is just a basic kind of slide that talks about the layered services that a company could have, right? So in this case, I want them to read energy services first. And maybe this is a series of like 3 slides, and maybe I'm like just popping through it like this, where I'm going back and forth. Just by using contrast, that dark blue and white, I get them to read this. You can't help it. You immediately go to this slide, you're going to read this and you're going to read this. It's just human nature. You're going to go towards that higher contrast and you're going to read this first. And the great thing is as you're talking about it, and you would say like this, you'd be like, okay, first let's talk about energy service, blah, 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 blah. Now, the next cool thing about this product is the payments network. Boom, now we have the contrast over here. Now their eyes are down here. If these were all the same color, you're not going to get that visual hierarchy. You're just not going to get it. Now, something like this, you're talking about a mobile app. How do I get them to focus on this little white thing, whatever, the white photo button or whatever that is? If I use contrast, this bright orange is highly contrasting to the background. If I were to use like a light beige or something like that, it's not going to pop as much. But because the contrast of the orange to the background, boom, it pops forward. You can't help. You're not going to be looking at his thumb, right? You're not going to be looking at that thumb. You're going to be looking right there where you want them. Again, you are in control now of where they look. Same way with something like this, a rule of 3 here. Let's say I want to talk about 24/7 services. Boom, I put a contrasting background on. I mean, this doesn't look that great, but again, it's just about using that contrast to bring their eye forward. So that's how you use contrast. Next is opacity, right? So how do you use something? How do you use just every PowerPoint keynote? They all have opacity settings. How do you use that to create visual hierarchy? Company timeline. If you're talking about a specific date, right? So if I was talking about 2010, and let's say these were all different dates or whatever, but I'm getting them to understand and look at this date first. And then I would make this darker if I go to the next slide, right? So I go from here, just using opacity. All I did was select this and just make it like 50%. Usually 50% does the job. It's enough contrast there, opacity wise, that it's going to help you use opacity just to jump onto that particular date. Now, size. This is a big one. How do you use size and this principle right here, as far as design, is a big one as far as how do you use font sizes and image sizes, but mostly font sizes to create that visual hierarchy. If you notice, the biggest item on here font size wise, and this may seem obvious, but again, if you're thinking through and you understand these principles, you can just reuse them and they become natural to you. So obviously this is the biggest font size here, so it sticks out as the most important. Secondary would be 2010, so that's second in importance. And number 3 would be the body copy, which is the smallest copy on the screen. Now, if you look at this slide, so I have marketing data, how we marketed, blah, 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 right? I can see obviously number 1, marketing data, sales data, and launch data. These are all, the top kind of headers. Then we have a level 2, which is how we sold how we launched. Now, the one thing that the key to all this too is make sure there's a big enough difference between the sizes. Like if this were 42 and then this were like 39, that's not a big enough jump. So make sure, now go back to that type scale that we created earlier. That's going to help you make sure that there's a significant amount of contrast in size. So it's super clear. This is obviously bigger than this, and this is obviously bigger than that it's not off by like 1 or 2 pixels. So you can see here, and then the smallest one is number 3. Now, here's the thing I see all the time. I see people, I don't know what it is about icons. People bring in icons and they make them giant. Well, there's a difference between icons and illustrations. If this was an illustration of marketing data and it was meant to communicate a very specific idea, then I would make it bigger. But icons aren't there to communicate an actual idea. They're just there to reinforce the copy here and just give it a little bit of visual connection, just a little bit. It's subtle. You'll know if it's too big. If I took out marketing data, sales and launch, would they have any idea what these mean? I would see a briefcase with, I don't know what's in there, briefcase. I'd see money recycled, whatever that is. And then like, I see like scales, like, is this a legal thing or whatever? You had no idea what these are because they don't say anything. I always say, make them smaller, right? So if it's in a visual hierarchy, your outline would not be like suitcase icon, then marketing data, how we market it. It would actually be marketing data. And then the suitcase, whatever that is, sales data, whatever, that just lends to that. So you can make it smaller there. And that's how you would use size to make sure that that visual hierarchy is on. I see this all the time as well, like in charts, in graphs and stuff like that. Like, the size contrast is not enough here visually. So I'm not sure which they're competing with each other. I'm not sure which one to look at first, but if I make this one, boom, it's much bigger now. And I can obviously see Machine 8 obviously is doing better than Slicer. I don't know what that is until boom, I go over here and I see first quarter growth or whatever that is. But again, visually, this is not as impactful as that slide, making that much bigger and using size to communicate that visually is very important. I love this one too. They use these giant buildings. In fact, what I love about this is it goes completely off the screen. It's so big, it doesn't even fit on the slide. So you can use that to exaggerate the point from 500,000 to 5 million, however they do that, right? The last one is grid. So we learned how to make the grid. Now here's how to use the grid to make things more important or less important. So in this grid has 3 columns. So over here, let's say this was a restaurant pitch or whatever, as a partnership. They want to see the texture of the leaves and the texture of the noodles and taste it just because it's such great photography. This is secondary. That it doesn't, again, show, don't tell. This, if you're pitching to investors that are investing in a restaurant, you want them to see and feel the food. It's not just about saying exquisite dining, it's actually using the photography. And I use 2 columns of this grid to really make sure that's the most important thing. Now watch when I do this. Now I use only 1 column in this grid. Now this is the thing, right? This is the star of the show. So this could be talking about, maybe it's something other than the food. Maybe it's like, the real estate plan where it's like, obviously you don't want some big, you can't really illustrate real estate with some big juicy picture or whatever. You want to make this the star of the show. That way, then you're using 2 of those columns and this is only using 1/3 of those columns. That's how you can use grids to your advantage. And I was missing one, spacing. This is the last one, I think, right? Hold on. Oh, no, I got one more. Sorry, I always get mixed up. So spacing, 2 more. Spacing. If you look at this slide, you got these giant headphones. So let's say you're pitching on, Beats headphones, or you're the inventor of headphones or whatever. There's a lot of big elements on this screen, big headline, big sub headline, big image. And they're competing with each other in size. And you're not sure which one to look at first, but by using space and giving it a little bit more space and breathing room, and also taking this down in size, now you can start to see what I want to read first. So just by giving it white space, you don't even really had to have made this smaller. You could have just moved the headphones down off the screen a little bit and just give them a little taste of the top of it or whatever. Again, I'm using white space and breathing room to bring it out first. Now, when I flip it, See how you're looking at now you're looking at the headstone first, and then you're looking at this. And just by flipping and giving this all the white space, that's how you can use it. And then proximity. So we've gone through space. Now we're going to talk about how close the items are to each other can determine their relative importance to each other. If you look at this slide, we've got a headline that says open source at scale. Experts, typo right there. That's another thing. Make sure you check for typos. Experts from Red Hat, Microsoft, Kickstarter. Another typo, that's great too. DigitalOcean talk current tools and future plans. For everybody who's been at a presentation and they've made there's always a couple people in the room that they cannot get their brain off of this little thing right here. And there's the fact that there's no ER in Kickstarter, but just hang with me here. So open source at scale, sub headline. And obviously this is some sort of like event. This is a sub headline here. And then these are 3 experts that they're going to be talking about from wherever they are. Now watch this. These are all in close proximity to each other. So I can kind of read them all at the same time. Now I'm using a little bit of size here, which is great. But what happens when you do this? Now it feels like 3 different ideas or 3 different individual sections. Open source at scale. Then I have this. Then I have this. And it starts to be a little confusing because now proximity wise, I'm not sure. Obviously these things relate, but I'm not sure how this relates to this. Now, if I do that, now all of a sudden this relates to this. Just by using proximity and space from one another, I can create that visual hierarchy to say, oh, I get it. These 2 are a part of a group and these. Same thing if I went here and made this in proximity, how I could say open source at scale. Okay, that's the name of the event. Oh, okay, these are the experts that they're going to be talking about just by using proximity. Now, how do you put all this stuff into practice? They're just going to back up and just do an overview of this whole presentation, kind of put a bow on it, wrap it up for Christmas or Hanukkah, right? So keep it simple. There's no reason to get insanely complicated on these things. Even if it's a send-along deck, there's no reason to say all the things on all the slides. The simplicity is key so that you're not distracting or disorienting the viewer while they're looking at the slides. So be ruthless with your copy. Edit, remove things. Ask yourself, do I really need this? Is this really necessary? Or is it going to throw them off into another line of thinking? In fact, I was talking with a founder the other day who had a slide and it was like a big kind of important point, but then the next slide, he didn't even talk about it on the next slide. I'm like, well, if you're not even going to back it up, because that's something they're going to think like, whoa, well, that's a pretty bold claim. And then he didn't even back it up. I'm like, just then get rid of it. Like there's no reason to have it if it's going to distract them. So be ruthless. And then write like they know nothing. You might be talking to so the other day I had a meeting with someone who's literally using CRISPR to create meat cells combined with vegetables and going head to head with these, the veggie companies, the Beyond Meat, those companies. I had no idea what the biogenetic, all that stuff, the bioengineering of it, I had no idea, but the story was written out in such a way that I was able to understand it by the end, and I was an expert by the end. And that's because they wrote it to people who might be a layperson. They don't understand anything about that. So don't take for granted that you're talking to an investor that understands everything about your market. They may not. They probably don't. And then make it conversational. There's no reason to be like super serious and super like everything have to be, you're not talking at them. Now we're doing this through Zoom, so it's a little tougher, but I don't ever like to just talk at people. I like to talk with them. I like to make it a conversation so that it feels more comfortable when it's not like they're just listening to a robot. We might as well just record a video and send it to them if it's not going to be conversational. Number 2, keep it consistent. Again, that's how you create that professional look, is creating those visual patterns that create that consistency. So make it easy on every slide. Don't get crazy with the layouts and the fonts and all that kind of stuff. Make it easy to get oriented by using those visual patterns, those layout patterns. So when they look at a slide, like you look at this slide, it's just 3 bullets. You don't like, I didn't flip them upside down or make it diagonal or whatever it is. You just see it. It's just 3 bullets. And don't reinvent the wheel, and just double check the alignments, double check the vertical alignments and horizontal alignments, and just make sure. And you could tell, just go like this, just go back and forth and see like, okay, you can even see here, like the bottom of that C lines up with the bottom of that E. It means these 2 bullets are centered in the screen. Great. That's all you need. And then the last one, keep it prioritized. How do you make sure that you orchestrate the flow and you get them to read the things that you want them to read in the order in which you want to read them? And you can use color and size and space, and you can use proximity to group these similar elements so that they read it the way that you'd like them to read it, so the story is communicated effectively. Just start small. Use some of these principles and just, you don't have to do all of them at the same time. Go back to your decks and be like, I could use to create this type scale and just tighten up my font sizes. Oh, it looks much better. Thanks, Jack. Like little things like that. Boom. Send me an email and just say, hey, Jack, that was awesome. Here's how it looks. And I'll take a look at it. I think that'd be awesome. If I can see people using these principles and making better decks. Now, one question I get all the time when I go through this training is I don't have the time to do this, right? And I get it. It's very hard. Even the teams that have full-time designers, those designers are usually working on the product. They don't, you ask a designer on your team to work on a deck, they're like, because I used to feel like that too. I'm like, I want to be working on the cool stuff. I don't want to be working on PowerPoint slides. Like, I just don't have the time. So there's two ways that you can do this. And you can either hire a pro designer. So Toptal, Toptal. And if you go there, use my link, my affiliate link. But I've had great experiences hiring designers off of Toptal. So you'll have to go in, you're going to have to work with their project manager to review 5 to 10 portfolios or whatever it is. And you have to hire them. If you don't know if they're a good designer or not, talk to one of your designer friends, be like, hey, what do you think of this one? Are they good? They'll be able to tell pretty quick. And you'll be paying hourly for them. So you want to get a good one. Don't cheap out on this. If you do like $30 an hour, you're not going to get good enough quality. So pay a great designer $150 to $175 an hour. And that usually they end up, when I was charging hourly, ended up around 4, sometimes 5K. And that you get high quality stuff. It takes a little bit longer, but you're going to get a high quality result. Now, I was doing that for a lot of years. And so what I was like, I kept getting clients who I would talk to and be like, oh, hourly's so hard to predict. How do I know what my budget's going to be? Like, I don't want to pay $5,000. Like, that's a lot of money. I just want to know how much it's going to cost me. And oftentimes I didn't know how much it was going to cost because we could have done 100 rounds of changes. So what I did is I was like, I could pack it. I've gotten so fast with these, and I've trained other, 1 or 2 other designers on my team to get really fast and efficient with these, because the principles are still the same. The stories change, but the principles are the same. So I started this productized service called Done For You Decks. It's super straightforward. Like, the process is basically, I take your slides, I lay them out in Figma, all your original slides, and boom, 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 boom. We just go redesign each one. Boom, 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 boom. Done. You make comments in Figma. We do 3 rounds of changes. The longest ones take 2 weeks. The quickest ones take 1 week. Some of them could take just a few days if you're really fast with the turnaround and the feedback. That's it. You know how much it's going to cost you. And if you take that deck and you raise, it's the difference between raising $5 or $10 million, and it's worth it for that small investment. And if you want to get more information, just go to Done For You Decks. You can book a call. I just did one today. Like, I'm not going to sit there and try to sell you on it. Like, I'll go through your deck and I will actively talk you out of it if you don't need it redesigned. Like, I actually did it to someone the other day, and I was like, this actually looks pretty good. Don't hire me. Just go do it. Now, if you get bad feedback, then maybe we can talk further. But I'm in it to take decks that you want to take from okay to fantastic, rather than like really good to like even better. It's not much of a difference. So that's kind of the ideal clients are the ones that really want to take it and make it shine. So that's really the presentation. I know I said I was going to take some questions.
There are a ton of questions, but I don't know if we have the time to go through all of them. What I will say is you should see, if you just have time to scroll through, how many people just really appreciated this event, how many people, this guy is a beast, man. We see that everyone wants an intro to you. I'm all in. Amazing presentation. So on behalf
That's awesome.
of the dozens of us, I think there was at the peak around 70 people on.
Oh, wow.
We really want to say thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us. It's greatly appreciated. I guess I guess everyone could follow up that you said you shared the link for how to book a call with you, how to reach out to you. So I guess people could follow up. I guess the one question that I saw come up in a number of times that I guess we can end with is, what do you think about templates, whether it be in PowerPoint, whether it be what was it called, beautiful.ai, what pitch, whatever it is? How do you think about just using kind of these off the shelf templates? Yeah, I'll put it to you.
Yes, I think those are totally fine. Like if you're looking for, and I found, look, I've been the scrappy. I mean, I'm still bootstrap startups and stuff like that. Money is tight. Use those. Like you don't have to, you know, if you don't need the Ferrari, right? If you're going out for your first round, your small check at a 50K or 100K, then use those templates and use some of these principles to take those layouts, because it's not one size fits all. Because here's what I learned is you'll have a template here and then you'll paste your content in, and then the whole layout gets messed up because you're like, oh wow, that headline size was only designed for like, you know, 340 characters and now it looks terrible, right? So using some of these tricks, you can start to make it look better. Now, when you start getting, you've raised your next round, or you have that money, because that takes time. It does. Like anybody who's ever installed a WordPress template knows, or a Shopify template, it's not just like, boom, you're done. And I spent 10 years creating user generated design tools with Flavors and Goodsy. And it is hard to create a one size fits all solution. So it's going to get you to like, you know, 70% good. And maybe that's all you need. If you have a great product, great story, and Jordan, you know this, like you're going to see it and be like, you know, I'm more impressed with the founder right now. I'm more impressed with the idea. Let's go. Let's do this. Right now, when you start getting more serious, you've raised that next round, then you can step it up, you know, either hire a designer, go with what I'm doing. And that's what's going to get you to that like Tesla, Airbnb, Uber level that you want when you're going out there and you're pitching the big investors, or you're pitching you have a big sales partnership meeting and there's a whole bunch of people in the room and you can't afford to have anything messed up. It's got to look tight so they're not distracted, then go there. So either way, there's always this unique situation.
Got it. Awesome. Cool. Well, with that, we'll end it here. On behalf of everyone, thank you so much, Jack. Greatly appreciated.
And Jordan, I tell you what I'll do, because there's so many of these questions. I'm just going to go through and after I hang up here, I'm just going to video record myself answering these, and then you can email it out to them.
Perfect.
Does that work?
Let's do that. And if anyone, reminder, if anyone wants to chat more with Jack, anyone wants to get their deck design, anyone wants to just ask him questions, go to doneforyoudecks.com. If you're raising a pre-seed or seed round, ground up, we'd love to chat with you. That's our sweet spot. That's where we love to invest. If you know of anyone who's looking for a deck to be designed, send them to Jack. And if you know of anyone who's looking to start a startup, please feel free to send them our way. And with that, thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Jack. And everyone,
thanks, Jordan.
Have an awesome day and happy holidays.
All right. See you, everybody.
Have a good one.